The Future History of Energy and Transportation. Documenting the paradigm shift from the era of oil and internal combustion to the era of robotics. By Julian Cox. Narrated by the author with the aid of an artificial intelligence. Chapter 16. Of Vehicle Autonomy. While there have been various experiments in self-guided ground vehicles going back decades, looking now over more recent developments in vehicle autonomy, based on machine intelligence, there appears to have been two main approaches. Broadly speaking, Tesla and Google et al. These approaches are subtly but profoundly different, and the absence versus the presence of a LiDAR-based sensor suite gives a hint at that difference. LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, is essentially a laser-based radar that offers positive 3D digitization and the potential for identification of targets within the line of sight, range, resolution and refresh rate of a scanning laser beam, producing data built up principally of a topographic map of distance measurements surrounding the sensor head. Prior to the development of adequately long-ranged ultrasonic sensors for road vehicles, LiDAR was practically a required tool for autonomous vehicle researchers to improve the detection of pedestrians. Early digital cameras could prove inadequate on account of contrast to noise ratio, while radar, even at suboptimally high carrier frequencies for sensor range, is typically altogether unreliable for detecting people, owing to a combination of poor radar reflectivity of the human body, such as a child or an adult wearing bathing gear, combined with an inconsistent assortment of radar beacons from metal belt buckles and watches, electronic devices, jewelry, keys, tools and so on. While in some cases the cost and size of low-power LiDAR sensors has fallen dramatically enough to incorporate them into a smartphone, for advanced focus assist and to better compose augmented reality artifacts in an image on screen, as at 2020, the cost of a powerful LiDAR sensor suite potentially capable of operating a vehicle, remained in excess of, and as much as double the average U.S. new vehicle selling price. Remaining issues tend to be a constraint, not least that of cost, to place a single large primary LiDAR sensor on the roof of a vehicle where it stands to interfere with aesthetics and aerodynamics and where its field of view is obscured by the edges of the roof and front of the vehicle, from the vehicle's immediate surroundings. More so if the vehicle in question is not extremely compact or the LiDAR sensor not mounted much higher than the roof, to approximate the ideal shape for a single LiDAR's field of view, namely a cone with the sensor at the top. A LiDAR system aboard a road vehicle requires adequate output power to function well in daylight, to overwhelm ambient radiation in the same spectrum as its own laser or lasers and to overcome atmospheric attenuation and backscatter due to dust, sand, smog, hail, snow, fog and rain. Because all of the useful radiant energy a LiDAR attempts to detect and process is a reflection of its own output. Moreover, and despite impressive improvements in range and resolution of LiDAR imaging, the benefit of delivering a prepackaged digitized distance field ultimately serves to reduce back-end processing loads. This is not an enduring problem to solve, given adequate compute power, while coming at a severe and enduring penalty when compared to ingesting one-to-many high-resolution photorealistic video streams, supplied by extremely cost-optimized, compact and low-power passive cameras. Especially considering road markings and vehicle reflectors are designed to be optimally visible and comprehensible in the visible spectrum, in both ambient and artificial light. Additional passive detection in the near-infrared spectrum is potentially useful, and this is easily and cheaply incorporated into camera specifications. Normally, the design of a camera requires some effort to prevent detection and processing of infrared from low-cost CMOS and CCD sensors. Analyzing a state-of-the-art LiDAR image, credit Luminar, for Volvo, while superficially impressive to look at, what seems noteworthy is its low resolution with significant pixelation, to compare with a JPEG of only a few kilobytes. Many road signs are visible, however none of the information on them is discernible for lack of depth information, but also for inadequate resolution at a distance of 5 or 6 car lengths, regardless. Even if a differential attenuation method could somehow be developed, to pick out the difference between symbols and background as they might appear in the visible spectrum. Similarly, there appears to be a hint of at least one, possibly two pedestrian crossings, crosswalks, judging by what could be the thickness of road paint. Beyond that, road markings of the type designed to be highly reflective of visible light, if any, are indiscernible. This is vital driving information in the real world that has not been imaged. Most strikingly, The image gives the impression of a scene illuminated by a searchlight in the pitch dark, despite what appears to be a daytime scene with several pedestrians. There is a hard shadow that lacks any data in the near field surrounding the vehicle, where apparently the laser supplying the illumination is occluded remarkably more so than the imaging sensor detecting its reflections. Likely there are significant thermal constraints, lens miniaturization constraints and mechanical constraints, plus an imperative to avoid destroying the sensor with a high-intensity reflection from a nearby raindrop or curious hands, to prevent a powerful spinning laser emitter, probably a rapidly spinning and oscillating mirror, doubtless in a gyroscopic spindle to handle road bumps, being brought into closer proximity and alignment with a sensor tuned to the same frequency. In any event, the image features very pronounced data shadows behind pedestrians and cars. The most prominent example covers an area of the image greater than the car casting the shadow. This is in addition to the simple occlusion of the area of the image behind the car. These data shadows appear large enough to conceal multiple pedestrians, one or more motorcycle, and in this instance an entire car. All objects that would ordinarily be in camera shot from the same perspective. Naturally, neither ambient daylight, street lights nor vehicle lights, even at night, will remedy these data shadows. To the extent any of those sources of radiant energy encroached on the same spectrum that the detector is tuned to, that would be noise to exclude from the modulated signal generated by the laser. Curbs appear to be distinct, as do pedestrians, unless some of the latter are occluded by the data shadows cast by other pedestrians and by vehicles. Similarly, cars, except for one object of car size seemingly in the road, or perhaps on a sidewalk that could be anything, and another that is probably a car but is mostly occluded in the data shadow of another car. On the plus side, there appears to be excellent contrast for midfield potholes. Authors note, this is actually surprisingly unsatisfactory given the high volume of hype for this technology. It looks as if developing a LiDAR sensor that is suitable for road vehicle autonomy is a significant problem in its own right, much less an obvious solution, and solving the problems with this LiDAR looks like a distraction that is likely not on the critical path at all. Analyzing an ordinary color photograph, digitized with a consumer-grade solid-state CMOS sensor, what is striking is the massive amount of intelligible data by contrast to the LiDAR image, not just a very great improvement in resolution but also the fact it is in full color and not merely a false color image, representing the contrasting distances of objects and their surface features. Doubtless this additional richness comes at the expense of some modest degree of imprecision when it comes to depth information. It is possible that a LiDAR could be useful to help train a machine vision neural net to estimate distance, but beyond that, the richness of useful data and the affordability of stereoscopic vision and beyond, is shockingly to the advantage of the camera. It is almost as if there is a reason why biology on Earth, culminating in humans, favored eyes operating in the visual spectrum. Both machine vision and LiDAR-centric approaches to solving full autonomy are typically augmented with modern ultrasonic sensors, essentially discrete sonar devices, to provide proof positive of the presence of nearby pedestrians and vehicles, as well as nearby walls and so on. Ultrasonics provide reasonably precise distance information, especially at very low range. Many if not most modern cars have park distance sensors based on this technology. They benefit from low cost and simplicity to mount elegantly around the periphery of a vehicle, to monitor locations that are obscured from detection by roof-mounted LiDAR, close and under the front, sides and rear of the vehicle, as it pertains to children and animals. LiDAR tends to be best suited to scanning topographies, fixed objects and structures, and when seeking a precise and positive lock on something definite that the system is designed to look for. The optimum use case being one definite thing, such as a docking port of known proportions on an orbital spacecraft, so as to infer distance and orientation for docking. In the setting of road vehicle autonomy, the LiDAR is tasked with scanning a scene, and then massive compute power plays a game of snap with the whole deck in its possession, with various cheats and shortcuts, to see if it can pull a matching card. The result is no idea, found a match, it's a deer. Assuming a deer is there and that identifying deer is one of the things it is programmed to identify. The alternative, machine vision, lends itself to a more nuanced approach. For example, something looks concerning about this scene, maybe there is an animal in it, this scene has a deer in it. Not to detract from LiDAR unreasonably, whose image processor can of course measure and report the angular distance to an unidentified obstruction, to which an autonomy suite can respond appropriately, and furthermore, we are discussing LiDAR-centric systems. There are no LiDAR-based initiatives to solve full autonomy on the public roads that are not augmented with cameras. The purpose is to describe a philosophical difference in approaches to autonomy. The difference is arguably akin to addition versus subtraction. Subtraction, in the case of machine vision, proceed with any confidence remaining, if sufficient, after subtracting the identity and behavior of everything that is recognized and understood, for which there is an established driving strategy engaged, or else take evasive action or stop. Addition, in the case of LiDAR, proceed normally until something is detected, or some things are detected, that add up to a reason not to proceed as normal on a familiar route, and then engage in established evasive strategy, or stop. This difference is fundamental when approaching levels of acceptable reliability required for full and unsupervised self-driving. The Google system appears to have been born of a design philosophy aimed at building a maximally comprehensive database aboard each vehicle, capable of recognizing all of the building blocks of the real world that a vehicle could possibly encounter, in order to faithfully reconstruct a digital road on the fly. One that maximally emulates the world detected via the sensors, from which to identify which elements, if encountered, invoke special strategies. Essentially, the machine is driving in its own simulation, with the vulnerability that the real world may differ materially on occasion from any scene it is yet designed to simulate. Whereas the Tesla vision design philosophy appears to place the vehicle in the real world without preconception of what might be encountered and with the continual task of recognizing the scene completely to avert disengagement. The distinction here is that while the Google machine, now branded Waymo, and similar could potentially result in a more independently autonomous machine, a more self-contained driving robot, Tesla's appears to be a more intelligent approach to the problem of operating a vehicle within a fleet, an autonomous transport system, benefiting from Tesla's ability to leverage a comparatively enormous sensor-equipped, networked research fleet. In fact, this benefit is recursive, as a product of the difference in software design philosophy. It is not reasonable to put an additive system, as herein described, in the hands of customers, to discover by trial and error what blindsides the system catastrophically and without warning. At the time of writing, while there are millions of vehicles with camera-based ADAS, Advanced Driver Assistance System, features, including lane keeping assist, verging on full autonomy in the case of Tesla, there are no examples of a LiDAR-based ADAS on the public roads, in the hands of the driving public, and for very good reason beyond sensor cost alone. What is reasonable is to invite customers to operate a system that is gaining confidence incrementally, in scenarios it has mastered, while defaulting to the customer, or pulling over and stopping, whenever confidence begins to drop below a high degree of confidence. As a result, Tesla has accumulated at the time of writing, nominally a million vehicle strong, circa $60 billion research fleet, the subset of the total with adequate sensors. Most of these vehicles have been purchased by Tesla's customers and most of the balance are leased by customers from Tesla. Far from costing Tesla tens of billions of dollars of cash sunk into its research fleet, the sale of Tesla vehicles is hitherto the mainstay of the company's ability to produce revenue and attract capital. This in turn is a function of Tesla's incremental approach to solving full autonomy that will prove material long after driverless autonomy is solved, in the form of millions of robotaxis in the hands of private individuals, not Tesla, at zero capital cost to Tesla of launching or expanding the fleet, to any scale, at any rate of expansion. To be discussed. Customers are not only fronting the capital to assemble Tesla's robotaxi hardware-prepped fleet, their vehicles driven in traffic, and their driving decisions in the ordinary course of driving, supplies the data to train the Tesla autonomy suite in the direction of full autonomy. Whereas purchasing a matching $60 billion research fleet and hiring a million professional drivers to train it, both weekdays and weekends, day and night, in all weather conditions, driving responsibly, distractedly and irresponsibly to faithfully emulate real life and encountering other road users driving likewise, has proven unfeasible for Tesla's competitors. As has launching a LiDAR-based system of any scale, in all but the most controlled of public settings. For example, an exhaustively researched network of routes in a city. Meaning routes where everything fixed is mapped in data and everything conceivable that moves is monitored and identified and the gamut of possible behaviors and interactions in that setting are maximally characterized and constantly surveilled. This is a classic illustration of a local maximum, and there is value in it, arguably promotional, investor and government relations value. Arguably there is a business case to replicate and expand the geofence. Arguably that business case rests on transport as an excuse to fully digitize and intimately surveil the central business districts of cities the world over, rather than the sale of transportation. But in any case, this is very distinct from a general solution to self-driving, in which the familiarity or worrisome nature of a scene, anywhere, is perceived directly, like a human driver. The London Heathrow Airport Transit is an example of a fully autonomous vehicle operating in a very highly controlled setting, curbed off from route deviation and collision with oncoming vehicles and fenced off from pedestrians. For the Tesla-type system, every yet to be granted permission for a vehicle to proceed and every surprise, including those things that never happened to any vehicle before, pre-exist philosophically in a superset of the unfamiliar the machine is not yet permitted to tackle, as opposed to something missing from a live simulation because it cannot be simulated, yet is occurring in reality. To permit the Tesla vehicle to proceed, Tesla appears to have sought to build a maximally comprehensive database of familiar situations, such as handling the impact incidence potential of other road users on the basis of trajectories and rule-based deconfliction. Literally training the neural net uploaded to each vehicle to recognize ever-increasingly rare circumstances in which it may still proceed if encountered. In the case of the Tesla training fleet, whenever a vehicle loses confidence to proceed, it drops back to the driver with a driver alert and monitors what the driver does next to navigate the situation. Similarly, if the driver forces the system to disengage by taking control. In addition, upon dropping out of full driver assistance mode, the vehicle alerts Tesla of the incident and uploads the corresponding sensor data. This data may then be searched to train the neural net how to deal with that event in future, fleet-wide. Similarly for collision events, whether under human or machine control. Furthermore, the fleet can be polled to supply data corresponding to examples of objects, road features or driving situations to train the neural net in a general solution to that class of problem. Once the solution is uploaded to the fleet, it is run in shadow mode. Meaning that vehicles will likely continue to default to their drivers upon encountering a matching scenario, while it is also possible to compare what the driver or the previous software does, with what the solution in shadow mode would have chosen to do. Once the new solution is found to be satisfactory, then it is enabled, and so on. Thus the database of the familiar expands along with corresponding strategies, and so the machine gains justifiable driving confidence. Noting that the broad goal when transitioning to full self-driving is to maximally eliminate the inconvenience of vehicles pulling over and stopping and to minimize unwarranted emergency braking events. False positives aside, this, as opposed to eliminating events, where a vehicle should have taken evasive action but had no idea it should do so. Prior to training and authorization to proceed in a given scenario, the Tesla-type system will, in theory, conclude that's odd and take evasive action regardless of what it encounters, as opposed to the default potential in the case of a LiDAR-centric system, to fail to produce an appropriate, or any, response. Thus the procedure for improving the reliability of a LiDAR-centric system is indicative, philosophically, of an unending task of cataloging the superset of all possible unknowns, not to avoid unwanted braking events, but to avoid collisions. The difficulty with system architecture like this, to paraphrase Spock, is that having discounted every possibility, the impossible remains the correct answer. Meaning that having characterized a million things that could result in a vehicle collision, the default case of hitting the million and first still looms large. Indeed, the default case of hitting it potentially gains in probability. For the Tesla-type system operating in a full self-driving setting, without an authorized human driver, possibly without any passengers or any driving controls, the default in the case of insufficient certainty to proceed, will be to pull over and alert an operations hub, a command center, to take a look at the scene via the cameras and to make an executive decision regards what to do next. In other words, the vehicle should stop and ask for directions. Theoretically, such a system would allow the human operator to assume computer-assisted remote control of the vehicle. Certainly, and as far as remotely resetting the route. A fallback that must necessarily exist to route a cabin emergency, such as a medical emergency, to a hospital or to a rendezvous with emergency services. The Tesla Cloud Updatable Neural Net, defining what a passable road in a myriad contexts should normally look like in machine vision, in vector space, and what path to take and at what speed on an unobstructed journey, wherever a road has been adequately machine scouted by any vehicle on the network, this and always-on wireless networking, but most importantly a fail-safe as opposed to fail-dangerously software design philosophy, heavily weighted to impair convenience instead of safety throughout ongoing improvements, are just some of the reasons why we can expect to see acceptable Level 5 autonomy, full self-driving, from Tesla, years in advance of competing efforts. Broader issues relating to market dynamics are addressed in the chapter The Future History of Energy and Transportation. Yet another virtuous synergy in the case of Tesla was to produce vehicles with a control envelope far exceeding the road vehicle average, in terms of acceleration, cornering force and deceleration, to allow its nascent full autonomy suite, and indeed its human co-pilot, in the event of system disengagement, extra scope to evade a collision. Attempting to apply full autonomy safely to ultra-mass market economy vehicles before solving full autonomy for more capable vehicles, would have been to tackle the problem in the wrong order, both in terms of technology and capital efficiency. An announced fourth-generation vehicle, aimed at by Tesla in the $25,000 Toyota Corolla build cost bracket, this being an ultra-mass market robotaxi inclusive of a full autonomy suite but stripped altogether of manual controls and linkages, presumably with relatively modest driving performance on account of no need to be driven, is the natural next and more difficult step. Not a reasonable first commercial offering aimed for by LiDAR-based initiatives on account of inability to offer an incrementally safe product, prior to achieving safety. A small 5G saturated geofence with as many remote supervisors as taxi drivers presented by Waymo in Phoenix, Arizona, is definitionally not a commercial offering, as opposed to Tesla's incrementally capable vehicles, with fail-safe fallback to an owner-driver, prior to achieving practicality to complete any journey unsupervised, without stopping. The $25,000 Tesla is a vehicle made possible by learnings gained from solving full autonomy incrementally with mid-market vehicles and above featuring sports car performance, not just for the entertainment of drivers. Even so, the Tesla training fleet is enormous, both in terms of current scale and lead time at scale, when compared with Waymo and all similar LiDAR-based autonomous research fleets combined. Not to be conflated with very much more basic advanced driver assistance systems, such as those supplied to OEMs by Mobileye, recent acquisition of Intel, that has an installed base of some 16 million vehicles at the time of writing. Some proportion of which are potentially capable of recording data to assist in the development of autonomous systems, with the agreement of an OEM and its dealers, to be retrieved in batches during service visits. Such agreements have emerged, for example with VW. This touches upon one of the great non-technological impediments to full autonomy facing large 20th-century automotive manufacturers. That is an imperative to obtain the agreement of a third-party dealer sales and service channel, to intercede in their dealer-customer relationship, using an OEM data communications link, an OTA network, required to connect an OEM's developers to data from end customers' vehicles. A fully featured data link to the customer fleet would naturally permit an OEM to bypass its dealerships to monitor and assess the maintenance status of each vehicle, thereby to potentially challenge any dealership's claim for excessive warranty work, as well as to identify low-cost preventative maintenance initiatives that can stand to thwart a fleet-wide warranty replacement of a major subsystem, instigated by a dealer association triggering a highly profitable mandatory recall. It should be noted that this significant perverse incentive exists in the third-party dealership service model. That is, vast rewards for concealing from the customer known safety issues identified during routine maintenance and inspections, while collectively bargaining with the OEM over the price of prospective recall work, all the while lobbying regulators to mandate the recall to force the OEM's hand. This in turn, forcing the OEM to lobby regulators and the public via the media with denials that any such issue exists, even if it does, while customer injuries and fatalities mount. Simply to avoid being forced to write a blank check to third-party dealerships. Historic examples being Toyota versus unintended acceleration and GM pre-2010 bankruptcy versus an issue with keys falling out. This death spiral and maintenance cost inefficiency is at the root of systemic delays to resolve vehicle safety issues at the lowest cost for the OEM, and ultimately the customers of the dealership sales and service model. A scheme that is frequently misrepresented by dealer associations, as customer advocacy to hold OEMs to account, while slighting the targeted OEM as callous and irresponsible for fighting off extortionate demands. An eye-opening avenue to realign OEM and dealership incentives, reminiscent of the early days of Ford, including alignment on the matter of maintenance cost and safety, was identified when researching the chapter, a possible solution to auto market disruption. Meanwhile, conflicts of interest persist and seem set to hamper OEM development of both electrification and full autonomy, and ultimately constrain traditional OEMs to supply full autonomy, if and when available to them, in the format of corporate sharing fleets that an OEM must build out with cash, to the exclusion of supplying autonomous vehicles to private customers. Not so with Tesla, and not necessarily so with any new entrant. To put timescales on full autonomy, Tesla's full self-driving system can be expected to be technically competent to drive in any traffic situation in the 2022 timeframe, and Tesla is likely to be able to insist upon regulatory approval, at court if necessary, on grounds of comprehensively documented consumer protection and public safety data, with compelling graphic video evidence to prove it in the court of public opinion if required, should there be any unreasonable regulatory delay thereafter. Likely 2 or 3 years for the robotaxi fleet to awaken, all told. Around 2024 to 2025. For any behind this curve, this is not a drill.